We are honored to have with us Jim Richards, and I think Senator Burr set us up nicely for this next panel on basically the barriers, including global, for this ag biotech industry. Jim Richards works with Cornerstone Government Affairs as a partner, and he brings several different sectors of experience to this role in policy. He's worked in Congress as a staffer. He's worked at the USDA. He's been a small businessman. He served in the U.S. Army, and he's got a variety of perspectives to bring to this global discussion. And I want to welcome Jim, and he will introduce our other speakers for this panel.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you have enjoyed the discussion so far. And it's been hard for me to sit in the back row and listen to all this because each and every single one of those discussions that have taken place by our capable presenters this morning are issues that we deal with in D.C., and they kind of set the footprint for it. So this panel, we've got three very, very sharp and bright individuals that are going to discuss three different areas that each interact with what we've discussed this morning. But it's kind of, biotech, the impacts and challenges of the global regulatory environment. And they could probably spend an entire afternoon here, but it was a nice segue all the way through this morning from Senator Burr, from Bill on down the line. And you'll notice that one thing keeps coming back. We think R&D and science ought to be driven by its own, but at the end of the day, it has to deal with regulations, which are beget from policy, which are beget from politics, which goes back to that 99 and 1 and the other stats that exist up there, because the policy is set by the politics, which is set by the public's reaction to the policy writers, which is the Congress, and then the executive has to implement it. And then they've got to deal with the competitors in the governmental sphere on an international basis. And then that all impacts how the R&D, the technology, and the private sector has to interact not only with their host governments, but with every place and entity that they want to do business with. So you ask why we're up here, and I'll admit it, probably the second least popular profession in the country right now, right behind, well, maybe third, I don't know, used car salesmen, lawyers, and lobbyists. I'm a lobbyist and a consultant, and a lot of lobbyists are lawyers, so they're really double damned, if you want to know the truth. But we work for people like Syngenta in D.C. We work for people like RTI, rice producers, sugar producers, General Mills, ConAgra Foods, Chobani, the fastest growing company in the country right now in the food sector. Nothing but good. I don't know how many of you have that in your icebox now, but I do. My wife has been trying to get me to eat it for years. Well, not really years, because they've only been around for 5. And when they hired us earlier this year, I thought, well, hell, I better eat their product. And now I have it every single morning for breakfast. I'm actually feeling a little bit healthier. But all those people hire us to do, because why? Politics impact policy, which impacts regulations. And none of that happens in a vacuum. And you heard this discussion from Senator Burr this morning. You'll hear it from the panel this morning as well. There's something coming up on November 6th, presidential election. You all may have heard about it. It's on the news here and there. From the people in this room, it's important. Why? Free trade agreements. The politics that then will set the policy which everybody in this room will have to live in and exercise their free enterprise rights under, their scientific goals, their scientific principles, research, development. It was mentioned this morning, Prop 37 in California, the labeling of GMO foods. It's a huge issue. That'll be decided in California on November 6th. It has national, international ramifications. Senator Burr mentioned it. Where does the federal preemption come in? If California requires labeling on foods for GMO products, how much of all of the California consumption is produced in California? Good amount, but the vast majority is coming from elsewhere. General Mills, ConAgra, PepsiCo, on down the line, they don't all produce everything consumed in California there. They produce it elsewhere. So that means they're going to have to label it separately. They're going to have to figure out the compliance cost. What about exports? Who's going to watch that California move and start to apply that to their regulatory environments? What's Brazil going to do? What's the EU going to do? What's the EU going to do with their former colonies in Africa that they use as third-party fronts and as regulatory barriers to our products to circumvent and collect and stamp down competition, because they know that they've got a monopoly, essentially, if they can use the regulatory process set by politics that creates the policy. Huge issues across the board. Frankenfoods, you know, where does that term come from? It works from that 1%. I like the new definition of 1%, by the way. It's true in a lot of ways. But there are ways that we can get around that. And one that we just got enacted into law, I think it was signed October 1st, Lisa, it may have been, the PREA reauthorization, which is pesticide registration. That's a unique example. Debbie Stabenow, Senator, Michigan, Democrat. Frank Lucas, Congressman, Republican, Oklahoma, House. They work together with stakeholders, industry, EPA, and people like the EDF and Natural Resources Defense Council to reauthorize PREA, which allows the collection of registration fees that is good for industry because they have certainty. They know that when they're putting money in the door, that they're going to have that money be replaced and reinforced into the approval of their products. Certainty from the regulatory side, because they know that they're going to have to do their job. And the stakeholders on the outside like it too, because they've got a voice. There are ways to get things done that you can get good policy and therefore good politics that drives the good policy. And I'll introduce the panel, and I won't read their bios, by the way, because y'all are all smart. They're in the books, and I hate it when I go to a conference and everybody reads the word for word the bio that's in front of you. It's like a waste of time. Same thing with PowerPoints. No, there won't be any PowerPoints because these guys are way too smart. They don't need you to stare up at numbers on the screen when they can wow you with the words that will be emanating from their mouths. So two things that I really despise about conferences, you won't see in this panel at least, which is good. So Jason, he's going to kind of talk about commodity price trends and projections, how they support the continued R&D, how that impacts from a little bit of a global perspective. And then we're going to jump in with Lisa, and she's going to talk about the industry approach on asynchronous approval. That's huge. How about we approve something for use domestically? Is it any good if we can't have certainty that it's going to be accepted in Africa, for example, Asia, Europe? It makes it very, very difficult. Wait, we're ready to go. Uh-oh, we can't use it. And then Allie is really going to get into industry's Excellence Through Stewardship Program and how it's designed to boost that confidence. And it all goes back to what we talked about before, voices, that silent majority. Everybody in this room cares about what we do and how we do it. And at the end of the day, if that silent majority doesn't educate, use facts, science, and alignment to advance the cause, to feed those 9 billion people in 50 years, then that vocal minority that's going to win in California likely about a month from now is going to rule the day. And then where will we be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 15 years from now? So with that being said, I'm going to sit down and shut up for the next 30 or 40 minutes. Our esteemed panelists are going to each successfully work through their thing. I'm going to throw a leading question out there, and you may have got a hint of it this morning in a question and my comments a minute ago, Prop 37, that they'll touch on as well, and then we'll open up questions for the floor. So again, thanks, and look forward to hearing the wisdom from the panel.
Can you hear me now? All right, great. Thank you very much for the introduction. As Jim mentioned, I plan to talk about global food consumption patterns and how they're shaping demand for agricultural commodities, and then how that will affect long-term investment in biotechnology with a focus on agriculture. Over the last few years, commodities have been some of the most profitable asset classes for investors. Deutsche Bank is ranked 40 major global assets and indices ranging from S&P 500 to Nikkei Index, precious metals, crude oil, T-bills, etc. On the low end of the scale, the Greek Athix pulls down the indices overall with performance of 90% losses. On the other end of the scale, the top overall performer of all the assets that they looked at was corn, with returns of nearly 150%. Gold was a close second. I'd love to be able to say that I could have got in and invested early on this, but as a USDA employee that works in the office which releases the World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates, if I had done so, I'd probably be about 45 miles away from here in Butner Correctional Facility with a noteworthy Ponzi scheme operator. But in any case, the continually high corn prices have led to increased planted acreage in recent years. And this year, though, yields will be down significantly or have been down significantly as a result of the drought. Corn acreage planted reached over 96 million acres, which was the most since the 1937-38 crop year. That said, the arable land base in the United States is relatively tight compared to our major competitors in South America and to some extent the Black Sea region. Thus, there's an increased emphasis and more pressure to enhance traits and improve yields. We've entered a new paradigm when it comes to agricultural prices, production, and trade, and this has been touched on by a number of our speakers earlier, that we can't just consider this as a domestic market for agriculture. This has been the case for a long time, as exports have been a major driver throughout U.S. ag history. But to give us a little bit of historical context about this, interestingly enough, Bill Weldon in one of his slides earlier had touched on one of the points that I had highlighted here, and you may recall from his slide that basically in a 25-year period from the late 1940s until the early 1970s, ag production technology improved across the board. Corn yields increased by 60 bushels per acre during this time period, from 38 bushels to 97 bushels in 1972. The high-yielding year in 1972 came on the heels of what was, at the time, record production in the United States. And the weighted average farm price for corn fell from $1.33 per bushel to $1.08. However, something big happened. Then came the Soviets' Great Grain Robbery. For those that don't know, what happened was the Soviet wheat crops failed, and they came over and bought vast quantities of U.S. stocks, which sent grain and oilseed prices soaring. It was completely unprecedented at the time. Soybean prices went from $3.30 a bushel to $12.90 a bushel. This is in 1972. $12.90 might seem a little low now, but at that time, this was a tremendous shock. And this also represented a shift in the way that the U.S. government looked at agriculture and agricultural trade. It was a major paradigm policy shift. And grain prices were never the same after that. If we look at the next time period from 1975 to 2005, grain prices operated at a much higher level than the preceding 25 years. And there was much greater price volatility during this time period. However, as we reached this new level, you saw price volatility jump up quite a bit, but if you were able to you can draw a flat trend line through those prices, and you'll see that basically it's fairly steady. In 2004, corn yields reached 160 bushels per acre. We had record production levels of 118 million bushels, and the price of corn was $2 a bushel, the same price that it was in 1977. It was also during this time period in my career when I was spending a lot of time in Geneva at the WTO as part of the Doha Round negotiations. We'd sit in rooms and hear developing country delegations come in and with prepared statements condemning U.S. farm policy with accusations that it was keeping commodity prices artificially low. At that time, we were really pressing in Doha in the Doha Round to try to get new market access to many of the developing countries. However, they were insistent that we remove or greatly reduce our domestic support payments before they would grant any new access. However, what was going on in their own countries during the same time period set the course for what they ultimately wanted. They wanted to get rid of low commodity prices so that their producers could make more money. Well, that's exactly what was happening at home, and it didn't take U.S. To cut its domestic support programs. What we've seen in emerging markets in the last decade has been tremendous growth in GDP. Senator Byrd mentioned earlier that perhaps the figures might belie the truth a little bit, but I'll go ahead and report a few of them anyway. China's had sustained GDP growth over the last decade, over 8%, reaching 13% at times. Indonesia, with the world's fourth largest population, fourth behind the U.S., that is, has had GDP growth of 5 to over 6% and had barely a dip through the 2009 global recession. Countries like Turkey, South Korea, and Mexico have recovered from the global recession nicely. However, the GDP figures really don't tell the whole story, because ultimately food demand is about the people. People in China, Indonesia, Vietnam, throughout Latin America are moving out of the low income status to the middle class. Bill touched on this earlier in his presentation. What we've done is, using global insight projections on GDP and income distribution, we expect that over the next 10 years, middle class households will double to 1 billion. You'll note that in Bill's speech, he noted 3 million people. This is looking at middle class households as a whole. So doubling from 500 million to 1 billion in the next 10 years, with by far the largest increase in the middle class coming in the developing countries, an 83% increase overall. China and India dominate this metric. In 2011, there were 143 million middle-class households in China. We expect this to increase by an additional 223 million middle-class households. India is expected to add 130 middle-class households to the 34 million class households that it has today. And I'm not talking about a middle class here in terms of a U.S. standard, where that might imply being able to purchase a new F-150. This is about middle class in terms of their diets, moving from low-income diets that were reliant on staple commodities, staple foods, and diversifying to a much broader reach of foods, with the main component being that of meat, a switch in the source of protein to more meat. And this is the defining trend that's already occurring and that will continue to occur and drive agricultural production technology today. It's also good news for North Carolina hog and poultry producers. In the state, 55% of North Carolina's farm cash receipts come from sales of hogs, broilers, and turkeys. That's $6 billion in 2011 alone. China's meat consumption from 2002 to 2012 has increased 27%. Mexico's consumption is up 21%. Southeast Asia and South American consumption of meat is up 40%. Overall, consumption of beef, pork, and poultry has increased 38 million metric tons in 10 years. For comparison, over the same time period, developed country consumption has increased 2%, 1.6 million metric tons. So you can see where the growth is. U.S. producers have responded to this demand as meat exports have increased significantly in the last decade. U.S. pork exports have increased from $1.5 billion to $5.5 billion last year. And that's not all due to just prices. Prices have obviously gone up a lot during that time period as well, but volumes have increased by 200%. A similar story could be told for poultry exports as well, but I won't get into the figures on that. And of course, the expansion of meat consumption also means that worldwide, there's a greater consumption of feed grains and oilseeds. Total consumption of feed grains and oilseeds in the developing world has increased by 50%, 210 million metric tons. The most noteworthy example of increased feed grain and oilseed consumption is that of China. China's had just a voracious appetite for oilseeds and soybeans in particular over the last decade. Going back to 2002, the U.S. exported 4 million metric tons of soybeans to China, valued at about $775 million. 2011, we shipped over 24 million metric tons. So going from 4 million metric tons to over 24 million metric tons, which was valued at $12 billion. It's just a tremendous expansion. And now the Chinese are buying our corn. We basically sold nothing for a long time. China was actually a corn exporter. Last year, we exported over 1 million metric tons So far this year, from October through July, we've shipped 4.3 million metric tons, valued at over $1.3 billion. So you can see where this is headed. So to summarize, developing countries, economies around the world continue to lead toward an ever larger number of middle-class households. And as a result of this, prices should remain at historically high levels. And this will be the main driver to spur further investment in biotechnology. Despite the protests of some, biotechnology will ultimately be what ensures food security around the world. Bill had some very interesting demographics that food security is not just in developing countries, as some like to think. It's right here at home as well. It's not to say that there won't be challenges for U.S. exporters and those that are like Brazil that have interest in exporting commodities as restrictive biotech policies continue to lag behind market demands. Thus, it's important for U.S. government to work with industry to try to establish trade policies that are based on science, transparent, and not knee-jerk reactions. Some of our other panelists here will be able to speak further to some of the specifics and ongoing activities concerning asynchronous approvals and the like. Lisa?
Okay, we'll start again. Good morning, I'm Lisa Zannoni with Syngenta, and I'm Global Head of Regulatory Affairs. Let me turn it up. Is this better? Okay, good. Third try is the charm here. I'm Lisa Zannoni. I'm Head of Global Regulatory Affairs for Syngenta, and I spend my time getting regulatory approvals for products to go commercial in the production country and import countries where it's destined to go. So today I'm going to talk about an industry issue that we have called asynchronous approvals. How many people have heard about asynchronous approvals? Anyone? Okay, a few of you. Well, what happens is when we sell a product, a GM trait product, and put it on the market, as you've heard from earlier speakers, we don't have a domestic market anymore. It's an international market. So GM traits that get into a commodity market require the production or the exporting country approval, plus approvals in all importing countries where it may be destined. And these are countries that have functioning regulatory systems and can accommodate the approvals that they need. So what happens is the regulatory systems aren't equal across countries. A typical GM trait requires at this point 19 approvals in 19 countries, and in some of those countries more than one approval. So a typical commodity GM trait would require about 33 approvals. So with lack of harmonization of regulatory systems internationally, and lack of transparency of data requirements, you end up with stagnating approvals. So if the issues come up when the company launches, it's in the production country and may not have all of approvals in the importing countries. So that's the problem. The impact, of course, when that happens is, first, the obvious one is there could be a delay in a product launch from the technology company. The consequences of that is that the farmers don't have access to the latest technology. And that's pretty significant when you think about what happened in the U.S. This year with the drought and the next wave of traits coming from the technology companies are the drought-resistant traits. So it's important that those get on the market and get into the farmers' hands. The other thing is just the commercial risk that is taken by the whole value chain. So they're not knowing if it will be accepted at the importing side, getting through customs, It impacts the grain trade, the technology company, and even the farmer not knowing where he can take his grain. Then there's monetary issues, so or cost. A shipment that doesn't get through customs can cost about $30 million, and that's came from the head of NEGA in a meeting we were in a couple of weeks ago, talking about the effects of asynchronous approvals. It also can result in fines because you would have an unapproved event in a country. It could result in destruction of the product, either seed or the grain shipment. A lot of times the grain shipments can be diverted into other countries, but may be at less cost. And for the government, it's a loss of export market share, and it's very costly to buy back market shares once you lose them at that level. So what are the solutions? So there's the solutions are twofold. One is the government, what governments need to do, and one is what industry needs to do. So governments need to make sure that they have transparent and predictable regulatory systems. They need to take off the dependencies of other regulatory approvals. For example, it's not uncommon for a country to require a USDA approval before you can submit. That's the case in China. Mexico and Philippines, you need an FDA approval before you submit. So when you have those dependencies, you'll never get synchronous approval. So they have to get those dependencies off of their, out of their regulations and have confidence in their own abilities to approve products. The other thing they need to do is to get rid of the zero tolerance threshold policies they have in place and instead work for trade facilitative LLP policies. So LLP stands for low level presence. It's when a commodity shipment goes in and it accommodates the low level amount of a specific trait. Because when you think about these commodity shipments, they could have lots of different traits in it at different amounts. So you want to be able to get low-level amounts in without the consequences of compliance issues. Industry also has a role. The companies need to make sure that we have quality dossiers and that we submit in a timely manner and as soon as possible and as close as possible within countries. And we also need to make sure we have good stewardship product, especially good product launches in place. And Ali is going to talk to you about the Excellence Through Stewardship programs that we have all signed on to. But what I really want to talk about is how the industry is working. We have a Global Alliance for Ag Biotech Trade. It's a broad-based industry coalition. It used to be known as GAPC for anybody in the industry. We just recently changed the name. We realized we had a branding problem because our name reflects that AP, adventitious presence, is what we want to avoid. And so we changed the name to be more reflective of the mission that we have. As I said, it's a broad-based coalition. It has the sectors of the agri-food industry. So the grain trade is a member, food industry, seed technology, the technology companies, and then the seed companies themselves. And the farmers have just joined us to be part of this process. What we do is we work with governments. We have a mission threefold. One is to get regulatory systems fixed so that products can get through in a reasonable time frame and to get these dependencies off the systems. Second one is to have systems where all technology can get through. So most of the GM traits and commodities come from the 6 big companies that have resources that can get the approvals in different countries. For instance, I have people in 29 countries getting these approvals. And so when you look at the future of where the technology is coming from. A lot of public sector and smaller companies are working on this technology, and the systems are such that it'd be very difficult for them to get these global approvals. So the second mission that we have is to try to get systems that everyone can work in and get approvals in. And the third thing is to get low-level presence policies in place. So the low-level presence policies are used as a safeguard until you get your approvals in place. Some of the significant milestones that we just passed, we were just invited to Rosario, Argentina a couple of weeks ago. I'm the current chair of the Global Alliance. The acronym is GABIT. Not the best acronym, I think, but anyway. So GABIT was invited to a meeting in Argentina, 15 like-minded countries that are working toward a solution to this. Canada just has released its proposed domestic policy on LLP, which is a good milestone, and they're looking at redefinition of zero. So instead of having a zero threshold, they would put a threshold in place that can accommodate actual reality, basically. So how testing is done and what the likelihood of the presence of that trait would be. And we also have seen improvements in 2 countries. The USDA announced earlier this year about their new review process that would cut the timelines significantly. And Argentina, at the beginning of the year, announced regulatory reform, also cutting its timelines. So there's some optimism, although it's a big job and a significant amount of work still needs to be done by both, again, governments and industry to resolve this issue. Here. There.
How about now? Better? Well, thank you, Lisa, and I'm glad you explained what regulatory is, because that will cut my presentation in half. So Jason just talked about the production and the demand trends and how Ag Biotech can be a tool. Lisa discussed that sometimes trade may be disrupted by products that have approval in one country and another. And also she explained what industry is doing about it. I want to build upon what industry is doing about it. And I want to talk about industry efforts on continuously improving the stewardship of our products. So the first question is, what is stewardship? Just make sure that we're all on the same page. So stewardship is defined as and I'm going to read it, the responsible management of a product from its inception through to his use and discontinuation. So in plain English, this, in our industry, it just means paying very careful attention to our products since early research, since discovery to development, through commercialization, and even after the product is discontinued, and making sure that it's being used for the purpose that it was intended. So a little bit of history. In 2006, 2007, industry had a few instances where small amounts of non-approved GM material was found in commerce. And obviously, it caused some disruption in commerce and in trade. As a response to this, in July of 2008, the Excellence Through Stewardship Program was founded mostly to achieve 3 goals. The 3 goals are, number 1, to fully comply with the regulatory requirements. Number 2 was to seek and achieve plant product integrity. I know it's a mouthful, but it means having the right product in the right place at the right time. And finally, to prevent and manage trade disruptions. With these 3 goals, a group of what we call the founder companies came together to develop this Excellence Through Stewardship Program. And the companies that were participant in it agreed to develop a quality management system. A quality management system is a component of stewardship that encompasses all the principles and processes and systems to ensure the quality of a product. So we committed to having a quality management system in each company and to be subject to third-party audits. This would, of course, increase transparency, increase our credibility, but at the same time, it will get an extra set of eyes to see our systems and see how we are enforcing them. And also, we had the opportunity to come together and share our best practices, the things that we do above and beyond to make sure that our products are stewarded correctly. The Excellence Through Stewardship Program developed very valuable materials, which are mostly guidances that are available to anybody that wants them. They're in a website. The program is open to anybody that would like to participate. And what these documents do and all this material is they enable any developer to produce their own system to make sure that they account appropriately and steward appropriately their product. These materials are mostly focused on 5 areas, which are stewardship, of course, also launch policy, discontinuation of the product, plant product integrity, and finally incident response and management. So continuing with that, the development of the program, Excellence Through Stewardship, the external audits of the founder companies started in 2008, 2009, and they started in the United States, where we first implemented this program. Later, in 2009, 2010, we took this initiative globally. And obviously, the audits continue globally. Until today, we are in audit cycles, and we are committed to continuing this process. The goal of any quality management system is to always continue to improve upon the systems that we already have. I did mention that the Excellence Through Stewardship Program is a global program. The benefits of a quality management system also can happen locally. And let's take, for example, the BQMS program, which is the Biotechnology Quality Management System that has been created by the United States Department of Agriculture. USDA, APHIS, BRS Biotechnology Regulatory Services, for those of you that are not familiar, is the part of USDA that regulates the genetic modified plants and insects. So that's the authority that we deal with it. So the Biotechnology Quality Management System program has been developed by USDA and put in place in order to ensure the compliance of the field trials of products that are regulated and it also, all the activities embracing best practices to minimize incidents. In this program, in the BQMS program, any developer or any person interested in participating in field trial or biotechnology products may become certified with USDA and therefore have a greater knowledge and a greater insight into the best practices of our industry. It's very nice to see how part of the BQMS program are big companies, of course, the big six were in there, but also there's several small companies and there's universities that are committed all the way from their leaders in being good stewards of their products while they are developing. To wrap up, I want to mention that all these efforts around stewardship are not intended to be duplicative. Stewardship is the responsibility of anybody that wants to develop a biotech product. And not only a biotech product, any product. It's a responsibility that we need to take as developers. We intend, through quality management systems, through good stewardship, we want to complement the regulations. And those regulations have to be focused on giving us the framework within we can work. Both the regulators, the developers, the producers, and researchers, we all have the same goals in mind, which are the ones that I mentioned earlier. We all want to ensure compliance. We all want to achieve and maintain the integrity of our products. And we want to minimize trade disruptions. In order to achieve this, it is imperative that we address through policy and through implementation of policy the issues of asynchronous approvals and no tolerance for low-level presence. Plant biotech is just at the beginning. I know we're talking about how much progress we have made in the last 20 years, but we really are only at the beginning. We have so much still to offer. Industry has pipelines full of products that are intended to help the farmer, that are intended to help the consumer, to help the environment. Academics are making strides into improving new crops, into assisting and creating new value for the crops that are already in commodity. We really have the power to revolutionize agriculture. Innovation is all around us. To make this innovation come true, to make Ag Biotech be sustainable, we must do it right. And we must take responsibility for our products, and we must make sure that we're committed to developing things right. So thank you.
So thanks everybody for the excellent presentation. The good news is we're not the last group before the reception this evening, but we are the last group before lunch. That being said, we've got some time for questions. And I want to start off with a little bit of a preface. You know, just a little bit over 40 years ago that this Malthusian theory came up that we would all be starving right now. Not to diminish the fact that there are substantial impacts on starvation and hunger throughout the world, and even in developed countries, such as America. But there was this thing called the Green Revolution. Most of you have heard about it. And a guy by the name of Norm Borlaug, who just passed away, I think it was last year. Incredible individual. I had the pleasure of meeting him several times. he basically thumbed his nose at Malthus and said, no, we can do better, and we did. And that's the reason y'all in this room are a lot of the reason that we have done better. That being said, Borlaug is a land grant guy. I know Allie is. I don't know if Jason and Lisa are as well. But the land grants, and I'm a little biased here because we represent the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, but specifically all the land grant ag deans across the country. 1890 schools, 1862s, and the 1994s. I knew Randy Woodson before he was an esteemed chancellor, where he was just a lowly dean at Purdue. And he's not here anymore, so I can say I really liked him better then. Not really. Randy's a great guy. NCSU was lucky as heck to get him. That being said, science is the way to go forward. And what science needs and what industry needs and what consumers needs is a consistent regulatory framework. Consistency. You know what you're dealing with. And I'll revert back to a question for the panelists on Prop 37, which we mentioned in California. And it's basically online to pass, and saw a substantial funding spent by a couple of companies in opposition to it. But it's become a political issue. And that 1% that was referenced earlier, that's the silent minority, the vocal minority. The silent majority hasn't stepped up. So assuming that passes, and the labeling of genetically modified organisms in food is required within the confines of California's borders, the Republic of California, as the senator referenced it, what are the impacts? And I'd really like to hear from this panel as how they see that, not necessarily domestically, because domestically we've got FDA, we've got FSIS, we've got AMS, we've got all sorts of issues on how we're going to interact on a republic basis, on the U.S. as a whole, the other 49 states and our territories, the 6 territories, with California and the countries that are dealing with it. But from a global basis, what kind of ramifications do you all see coming about as a result of this? Because if I'm there, I'm going, if I'm certain African countries or EU countries, I'm going, look, your own states are doing it. What's the matter with us? It's not a manufactured trade barrier. It's real. You're doing it domestically. So I'd like to hear your take on that.
Sure, I'll go ahead and step in here and then let some of the other panelists speak to it. The agency that I work for is the Foreign Agricultural Service, and we have U.S. staff based in 98 countries around the world and cover about 160 so countries through this staff. And as part of that, we're sort of the eyes and ears on the ground for reporting on what's happening, whether it be production or regulatory barriers that are being implemented, hopefully before they become implemented in other countries. And the flip side of that is we're also the mouthpiece for what happens in terms of U.S. policy. As Jim noted, it's not just limited to what happens in California, but it does have international consequences. Typically, we've tried to get out in front overseas when developing countries are looking at implementing new regulations. There's quite a bit of struggle between whether or not a developing country will take the EU approach more on the precautionary principle, or whether they come to look at food safety in more of the eyes of an FDA type approach. And so what happens in California on Prop 27 will have effects abroad, and many of the countries, as Jim notes, do take their cues from what we're doing. I think it's maybe I'll just leave it at that and see if there's any other questions that come up.
Yeah, Jason's hands are a little bit tied because he's working for the potential implementing side of the house, and can't comment on some policy probably that hasn't come about yet. But I think you can get a sense from his angst that there may be some issues that he and many others are going to have to deal with as a result of this proposition passing, if it indeed does.
Yeah, and I guess on that note, I'll note that earlier I mentioned that I do work on WTO-related issues, and there is a committee, the TBT committee, which is a Technical Barriers to Trade Committee, which addresses labeling issues specifically. And this is a committee that we've come to from the U.S. perspective when other countries impose labeling restrictions which are in violation of their WTO commitments. So we'll leave it at that, though.
So, Allie, I think we'd go to you if you had any comments on that. But from what I heard Jason just say, that means that is California in violation of WTO agreements if they pass this proposition?
I don't think I'm qualified to, to respond that. I do want to mention that there are some countries that have implemented legislation regarding labeling. We have the example of Brazil, where it was a lot of noise and a lot of interest in starting it. But after it was implemented, now it's an extra stamp. Everything says that contains transgenic and has really added no value to the consumer choice. However, it had a significant cost on the consumer. Who do you think is going to pay for all of it?
Yeah.
So the informed choice is obviously the right of anybody, but are we really talking about something dangerous? Are we really talking about that 1% and we're going to make every single consumer pay for this? So those are my 2 cents.
And Ali's right, other countries have implemented labeling type regimes, and even Japan has one that has a high threshold, though, and only certain number of ingredients. So really, when you talk about the labeling, it's how it's done, and if it's really a right to know, or whether it's something that is implicative of the safety of the product. So it's really how it's done. I think the threat too is a lot of times these initiatives, how they go from country to country. Some countries take them to the international forum level. So Codex Alimentarius, which is a standard-setting body under the UN, has had the labeling issue for years and years and years and just couldn't get resolved. So finally, they resolved it where both sides, it didn't say anything, both sides felt like they got something. But if the California does succeed in getting this, it could be, the next step might be for another country to take that into a Codex situation and start the issue again. And once that happens, when it's at a standard-setting organization, then it could be mandatory across all countries. It depends how the Codex has different levels. It can be guidance or it can be mandatory. So that's the real threat of something like this happening, is to have it mandated more broadly.
I could ask some questions all day long, but I know that there's questions out in the audience. So step up to the mic, please, if you have a question.
I have a question for maybe Ali and Lisa here. I'm Shekhar Budupalli from Monsanto Company. Today, innovation in agriculture is a global effort. And many companies are expanding in the context of not only businesses, but actually creating research enterprises, as both of your companies do as well. And there are regulations with respect to seed import. Like India has this National Biodiversity Act that prohibits import and export of the seed and things of that nature. What's your perspective on how do we globally innovate? And what's the regulatory government approaches that could actually understand, promote innovation at international level? I appreciate your thoughts.
You start.
I believe innovation has to start by demonstrating a benefit to the country. A country is not going to innovate just because it's neat to do so. Innovation has to prove that there is some value to the country to adopt measures and policies that will promote it. I believe in the case of seed in countries, for example, like India, that what we could do to help is create awareness in that country of what the benefits of policies facilitating innovation in seeds are. And I think that that could be one of the initiatives that we could, as industry at least, take upon. But again, I mean, it is the country. Just remember that in order to write policies and in order to create regulations that facilitate, it's politics. So there has to be a benefit for the consumer. There has to be a benefit for the farmer. A good incentive is going to be the shortage of food, but we really need to discover if there's a benefit for the public to make this problem or opportunity their own, because that's the only way that innovation can surge.
Yeah, and Ali's right. It's the country has to see a need, and if you look at the acceptance of this technology across countries, the countries have found the economic benefit. And last week we were in India at the Biosafety Protocol negotiations, and the protocol negotiations happen every 2 years, and it's a good look at where this technology is on how countries start negotiating, especially from a regional level. And last week it was almost a boring meeting, basically, because there were so many countries that were advocating for good, sound, science-based risk assessments, for not to overdo the documentation, labeling, those kind of things. And if you look back at where these countries are, that they've started the field testing. They've started to look at the economic benefits that can have, and I think Monsanto actually was the one that started cotton in a lot of these developing countries, which was a good first product, because you don't have, even though you get the food uses approvals for the oil, you don't have that food and feed significance, I guess, from the public looking at cotton like they would a corn or soya, that kind of thing. So a lot of these countries, there was one African country, I think it was Cameroon, had, from one negotiation last time to this time, complete turnaround, because he saw the economic values it could bring to the country, and the minister was backing pro-GM advocacy. So Ali's right. You have to find the benefit, and the economic benefits for the country has been the selling point.
Any other questions that are out there? I've got another one, because I think we have got a couple more minutes until you need to break. One more minute? Okay. So in closing, real quick, Malthus 40 years ago, roughly, said we'd be in dire straits right now. And I'm a little biased on the front, obviously, but if we don't embrace advancements in technology, we'll, in 2050, at that $9 billion person number, will he be right if we don't embrace the technology and advancements?
I don't think there's really ultimately there won't be a choice in the matter when there's mouths to feed. Governments will recognize the benefits. I think it's interesting to note that in some of the countries that have the most problems, it's guidance that they look to from other developed countries that actually may not be in their own benefit. In the case of the precautionary principles that are sometimes advocated out of the European Union. But ultimately, the food demand will be there, and there will be some changes that take place in the realm of biotechnology where more approvals occur.
I know we all talk about those big numbers, but I think that the world has not fully grasped how serious this is. I think that it's easy and it's mind-boggling, and I just don't think that people really understand what this is. I think when we get to those numbers, when we start getting closer, it's not just going to be biotech. everything is going to be embraced. If you can increase food supply, it's going to be, in my mind, there's no doubt that Ag Biotech will play a role. And will play a role because anything that any of you, and I'm speaking to the academics and industry, any ideas that can help is going to be adopted.
Yeah, I think the senator's comment about people not knowing Harris Teeter's not a farmer. There had been a consumer survey done several years ago with urban teenage, high school level kids about where food comes from. And the majority thought it was the grocery shelf. So there's it's a bigger problem. It's one about how do you get higher yields so you can do more with less on land that we do have, but also educating our own public about what it takes to get that. So it's a big challenge.
Please thank Lisa, Ali, and Jason. Thank you.